everybody, happy Friday. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I'm Angelia, and today I'm going to go over my week in reading and a little bit about TV watching. I didn't really do a Friday reads the past week or two. I was out of town one of the weeks and just took a break, and then another one, I was doing a lot of videos for end of June and beginning of July, and I figured I kind of covered those books along in those videos. So anyway, I'm trying to get back onto the pattern a little bit here, just for my own need for some sort of organization. So this week, I'll start with the TV shows. We're watching two shows that are both irritatingly dropping episodes like once a week. And I just really don't like to watch TV like that anymore. I know I grew up that way for decades, and I was fine, but now I want to watch things, I want at least an episode a night, or if I want to watch 2 episodes. We're not like big bingers where we watch back to back to back to back in one day, but we do like to we don't want to wait a whole week for the next part. But Hulu's kind of notorious. So both of these shows are on Hulu, which also Hulu gets on my nerves because they have super loud commercials, and I am too stingy to pay for the deluxe version that doesn't have commercials. So, So anyway, we're watching season 2 of Only Murders in the Building. If you're interested in that show, you need to go back and watch season 1, which should be all the way there, as it kind of, the plot has rolled forward, starting from some things that happened at the end of season 1. And so it is a comedic murder mystery about 2 older men and 1 young woman who become unlikely friends and collaborators in a true crime podcast when a murder occurs in their apartment building. And they get implicated in it. And now in season 2, there's been another murder, and they are again people of suspicion, even though it was not them, and they're trying to figure out who's framing them and who did the murder. So it's fun, it's very escapist, it's light and breezy, and so we enjoy that. And then the other one we're watching is called The Old Man, and it's also on Hulu. It stars Jeff Bridges and John Lithgow, and they are 2 agents. One of them, I don't know if they're CIA and FBI, or I know John Lithgow's in the FBI, and he's still working. But 30 years ago, the character played by Jeff Bridges went AWOL. He had a break with what he believed the policy of the United States having to do with what was going on between Afghanistan and Russia. And not to get too far into it, but anyway, he kind of went off the grid with his family. And it's years later, and he still lives like in this high degree of vigilance. He has these really 2 trained dogs there, and he sets booby traps around his bed and stuff like that. And he becomes aware that someone has been coming to look for him and bring him in. So he goes on the run. And so it goes kind of back and forth between what he is doing right now and the efforts to capture him and his efforts to evade and find his own solution to the conflict. And then it goes to the backstory about what happened 30 years ago. And so it's like escapist. It's pretty good. There's a lot of stuff in there where you're just kind of like, oh, why did he do that? Or why didn't you just do this? Or who would say that? And so, it's not super high end kind of cerebral, exercise, but it's good for the time, for what we're kind of living through right now, just wanting an escape from troubling aspects of American life, and also just some household stress, because we're involved right now in a kind of like a house purchase situation, and there's just lots of hoops to go through during that process, and you just need something relaxing in the evening time. All right, so on to the books. I've read 2 books this week that I enjoyed very much, and the first one was one of the ones that I selected for Jane Austen July, and this is a big old volume, but it has all the novels in it. But I read Emma this week, and I read it out of that big old behemoth, and I'm trying to slowly accumulate cloth-bound classic editions of Austen's works, but I don't have Emma yet. I do have this little antique version of Emma, and I did some research to try to find out. There's nothing anywhere of when this particular edition was printed. It's Nelson's Novels, which is a British company that was established in 1798, and I think that this was a cheap line of classics that they put out. And I would just guess from the looks of it, maybe like 1930s, but I'm not sure. And I don't read out of this volume because it feels a little fragile and the paper feels a little thin, but it's just kind of cool little antique copy of Emma that I have in my collection that I wanted to show you. And so anyway, Emma was fun once again. It is probably her breeziest book. I'd say that one and Northanger Abbey are the breezier of her works. This was probably the funniest, with the funniest side characters and dialogue. It's not as intense in some of the themes and explorations as you might find, especially maybe in Persuasion, a little bit in Pride and Prejudice, that gets a little bit deeper, probably because the main character does not have a lot of the obstacles that the women face in other of her books. There's no financial problem here. There's no necessity to marry in order to save the family home or to prevent herself from a life of poverty. And she's just kind of floating along and unaware of some of the unintentional damage that she causes other people, although her family friend Mr. Knightley tries to point these things out to her. So Emma does not go on a huge growth path in this novel. She grows a little bit, she gets a little more mature, becomes a little more thoughtful, a little more likely to admit her own mistakes. But it is just pretty light fare overall. I do have a perennial problem. Every time I read this book, I enjoy it again, but I cannot get over being a little creeped out about Mr. Knightley, the age gap. It's not so much the age gap, it's the part where he tells her that he's been in love with her since she was 13, which by the calculation of their age gap would have made him 29. And that, every time I'm just kind of like, oh, did you... But, it's just there for all eternity for me to not like every time I read the book. But I did have fun reading it again. And the other one that I read this week was so good. It was so good. The hype was real. All the people who said how much they enjoyed this book, I thought, okay, this better be good. And it was... Last Night at the Telegraph Club. This was so good. I really love this book. It is a historical fiction book set in 1954 in San Francisco's Chinatown, and it is the story of Lily who is a high school senior. Now, it is a young adult novel, but it is, there's a huge range of young adult novels. That's books for people anywhere from starting middle school up until starting college, really. It kind of shifts over into what they call now new adult. But, there's younger young adult and older young adult. And this is definitely for the older young adult. And it's a good book, though, for an adult as well. It is just really well written. The story is for anybody. The research was meticulous. And anyway, Lily, it's her senior year. And so there is a coming of age story. There is a time where you're trying to think about what's going to happen next. She's always lived in this little neighborhood where she's known everybody since she was very young. But it's about to be time to branch out. And so we have some common coming of age themes like realizing that your best friend is actually a lot different from you, and you're probably going to go different paths. She's dealing with some problems that are specifically about the time period and options for women, because she is really interested in math and science, and has a keen interest in aeronautical engineering, outer space. She has an aunt, fortunately, that is a mathematician, and so she does have a role model in her life to look up to. And she's also starting to realize slowly, she doesn't even know what this is or that it exists because it's never been presented to her, but she is a lesbian, and she realizes this gradually during the novel. She doesn't really know what these feelings are at first. She realizes that she's very intrigued by certain kinds of women that she sees in public or in publications, and she has a curiosity that she can't quite define. She doesn't know what this agitation is, or this unrest that she's starting to feel, and it takes her a while to actually find out what it is. And so, but she does discover that she discovers a friend at school that she's known for a while, but gradually they've eventually become the last two girls that are still in the advanced mathematics classes. And it's a girl named Kath who is not Asian. She's a white girl, and she wants to be a pilot. And she becomes friends with Kath, which puts her at odds with her old group of best friends and her best friend Shirley. But Kath introduces her to the Telegraph Club, which is a club for lesbians that has male impersonators. Now, when I was reading the story, I got to the part where she sees an ad for this male impersonator named Tommy Andrews in the paper, and I was like, really, did they just advertise that in the newspaper in 1954? So I went back and did a little research, and I found a wonderful thing that Malinda Lo has a 5-part blog called Notes from the Telegraph Club online, where she talks about all the research that she did in writing the novel. And she has a whole article about the history of male impersonators and drag kings, and when those terminologies changed over time, and how it began and evolved, and then how it fits in with the nightclubs and all this. So it's really interesting, and I highly recommend that you. She tries to keep it kind of spoiler free, but I kind of went back and read most of it after I read the book, just because I didn't want it to accidentally give something away. But also there's a little bit of historical information at the end of this book that covers some of the same territory. But if you do it online, you see a lot of cool photographs from what she's talking about over time. So she discovers this club. She discovers a whole world going on right in her city. She realizes who she is. And then, of course, conflicts emerge, where she has to decide how she's going to address this. And also, there's other things about the time period, about being Chinese American, the hysteria about communism, and what her own society in Chinatown expects of a good Chinese girl, and what her options are supposed to be versus what her aspirations are, and who she is falling in love with. So it is just so good. It was just a really good coming-of-age story, historical fiction story, queer love story. It's like just for anybody to enjoy, young adult, whatever. It was just a gem. And don't snooze on the research notes as well, because she really did a wonderful job making sure that it was accurate and authentic. So thank you to everybody who talked about how good this book was on their channels or in comments, because it did not disappoint, and this was really it's up there now with one of the best books I've read so far this year. Last night at the Telegraph Club, and it would be so fun of course, that club isn't real, it's a fiction book, but there were clubs like it, and it would be really fun to go in a time machine back to the 50s and just go in and feel the atmosphere in one of those clubs. Yeah, I love it. It was like a time machine. All right, so those are the two books I read. I guess I was in a time machine twice because I went back to the early 1800s for Emma, and then I went to 1954 Chinatown for Last Night at the Telegraph Club. Now I'm going forward into the future because the next book I'm going to read is Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, and I have not read any of her work before, so we'll see how this goes for me. I hope you have also had an excellent week in reading. You can share in the comments what you've been reading or react to any of the things that I've talked about today. And I hope you have a great weekend in store, and I'll be back soon. Please like and subscribe. Bye.